Sounds good. Awesome, welcome. We're gonna get started in a couple minutes. You can always, I'm not gonna make you put your name and where you're from in the chat, but if you have questions or reflections on anything so far, make sure you utilize the chat. You can always use it to just say hello, but there's no homework in the chat. How's it going, Thomas? You doing okay?
Doing excellent, thank you. Good
awesome.
To see you.
Where are you at? Where do you teach?
I am in northern Mexico, Torreon.
Nice.
Are you in Bozeman, is that right?
Yep. Yeah, in Montana.
That's the land of Steve Rinella, isn't it?
Who is that? Sorry, I should know who that is.
He writes a bunch of hunting books. So
that's right.
He's out of there. So
yep,
I read.
No. Nice. I grew up, my dad like dragging me through the mountains looking for elk when I was young. So it's definitely the place for it. Who else do we have? Jihad, am I saying that right?
Yes, hi.
Awesome. How are you doing today?
Great. I'm
awesome.
from Tegucigalpa, Honduras.
Okay, cool, in Honduras. Nice,
yes.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I think we'll wait just a little bit more.
I was actually talking to my assistant today about you and your, I told you, I can't imagine being in Paul's classroom as a student. It must be very
That's very
and engaging.
That's very sweet. Yeah, it is. You dropped out there a little bit, but all I heard was engaging, so I'll just assume that that's what you were talking about. So,
sorry,
yeah,
I was telling my assistant that I can imagine being in your class as a student when you're used to teaching the classroom. Like it must have been very engaging and I don't know.
Totally. Yeah,
enjoying.
It is. I miss that. Yeah, I've been out of the classroom for the last 8 years, but luckily when I go to schools, I get to teach. And so usually every time I visit a school, I'll teach a lab site or two. And so I do a lesson, like a kindergarten lesson or a physics lesson, and then people watch it. So I get to do some of that teaching, but I definitely, the one thing you miss when you're out of the classroom are your kids. Like, it's just, you can't replace that. It's just the kids that you get for the year. Awesome. Well, I think maybe Laura will get started. Welcome. It's nice to see all of you today. I'm not seeing all of you, but I'm sure some of you will turn your cameras on eventually. And I know we're kind of multitasking. Oh, it's nice to see Hannah and Sophia. Thanks so much. So what we're going to dig into in this time, in our time together today, is we're going to dig into like assessment, but more assessing the dimensions that are new. So instead of assessing just content and assessing like where are kids at in the understanding of science, we're going to try to start assessing these different dimensions. The big one is going to be the practices of science or the doing of science, and then the cross-cutting concepts. And so in our time together today, we're going to I'm going to do some just some sharing some information at the beginning. We'll then have a chance in breakout groups to look at an assessment that would be kind of at grade level. I think we'll do a lower elementary one, and then we'll do an upper elementary one. And then as a group, we'll start looking at student work. So we'll look at a student response in these different dimensions and kind of figure out like where they are. And so this will be a session where it'll be a little bit of learning, but also a little bit of work with other teachers. And so as always, like best practice when you're going into breakout groups as we go is whoever has the most stable internet connection, I think, if they don't mind sharing their screen and maybe sharing some of the documents for the people who are just kind of trying to catch up. So as we roll for the elementary teachers, for most of you, this will be the last time that I'll see you at this workshop. And so don't hesitate to throw questions in the chat as we go. I have a definite agenda of what I want to get to, but like anything, when we're doing inquiry, your questions are the most important thing. And where you're going is the most important thing. So always starting with a big kudos and thanks for coming. So without further ado, let me just share a few slides, maybe. And again, if something's not working, please let me know. Let's start here. Does this show up for you? Are you seeing this, Thomas? It should
Yep.
say assessing with SEPs. Thank you so much. Awesome. So to start with, we're going to have a website again that we're going to put all of this on. So the big website that I would always try to plug would be our website, The Wonder of Science. But also we've put together a specific page for today. And you'll have to use that in your breakout slides. And so let me put a link to that in the chat. It would always be helpful if you just kind of had that open in a browser. And so all the resources that we share will go there. Just think of it kind of like our Google Classroom for the day. But I want to start with kind of a story and use it as an analogy to where we're going. I've done a lot of work recently with schools in Hawaii. And the history of how people got there is a pretty amazing story, the navigating story. If you're not familiar with it, they moved essentially out of Southeast Asia, and just using little boats like this, sails, and just using simple navigation, they were able to move all the way to Hawaii, Easter Island, and then New Zealand. So essentially populating this massive ocean without GPS, without the internet, without anything. And to give you a sense of the scale, you're looking at half of the Earth. And so like, that's a huge amount of distance. They really were like the astronomers of their time. And a lot of like how they did that was lost, but we've started to understand now that it was really based in people. So there were these navigators, these really wise people that would pass that information on from generation to generation to generation. And so the analogy that I'm trying to kind of map with us today is we are like moving bravely into a new way of teaching science. And the most important thing, I'm going to show you a lot of tools and we're going to dig in today, but the most important thing is always the people. The people that you work with, the people who are sharing information on how to do this. That's like John Mark and Britta and Heather, and I would put myself there. So like the most important thing is to just ask questions when you ever get stuck and look to other people when you kind of get lost. But I think the interesting thing is they had tools. So they had tools to get around. And so this would be an example of a tool they used. In this stick chart, each of these little shells on here is an island or an atoll that's going to be somewhere in the ocean. And then the sticks actually represent where's the current flowing and where are the waves moving. And so if I want to move from this island here to this island here, I know that I have to kind of move in this direction and then move in that direction. And so the tools are super important when you don't know where you're going. And so the tool that we've been using a lot so far, the big tool we've been using is the performance assessment screening tool. So the assessment screening tool is a way to really see how well does the standard align to the assessment before we waste a lot of time. One thing that I've found is that with elementary teachers, if you can just show them what the assessment is, they'll figure out how to do the teaching and get the kids where they need to go. I think the big thing is that those assessments are changing a little bit. And so I just want to share a couple of more tools with you tonight, and we're going to play around with those. The first one are called the observable features of student performance. And that's a lot, but basically what it is, it represents all the work that my wife Laura and I did over, man, Laura, that was like weeks that we were doing. And so what we did is we went through every one of the standards. So there's 200 and some of those standards. We also dug in the standards into what are called the evidence statements of how we'll eventually assess students on their understanding. And then we were just looking for patterns. And so if I am, for example, as a student, if I'm like developing a model, what are the elements of a model? Or if I'm maybe asking a scientific question, what are the parts of that? And so we have all of those for all of the practices from K to 12, and we'll look at those just in a little bit. So that's one thing that as a tool that I think will be helpful to figure out where am I going? The second thing, and this looks a little busy, but we'll get into it in a bit. This is called a feature analysis chart. And the way it works is you put students across the top. And then you put what we want them to do on the left side. This is a pretty busy one because it was working with some chemistry teachers last week. But then you're just using a 1-0 rubric. So either they have it or they don't have it. And it's a really good way to see like, what are the patterns in my class? Where are the kids doing well and where are they not doing well? And so if any of you use standards-based assessing in your school or reporting in your school, this kind of looks like your report card. And so we've made a lot of these. And so we're going to dig into a very simplified version of that. So what are these? They really are, when we're thinking of our map of like navigating NGSS, the features tell us like where we're going. So it gives us direction on where we're going. And then this feature analysis chart will tell us, did we make it or not? My dad was a science teacher, or an educator rather, and he always said, you're more likely to get to a place if you know where you're going. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Let's just look at an example of that. So if kids are analyzing and interpreting data in K2, it's really hard, I'm sure, for you to see this on Zoom, but these are going to be the big parts of how we analyze data. It's not so important the details, but the big picture. So how do kids analyze and interpret data in kindergarten? Number one, they organize the data. Number two, they look for relationships in the data. And then number three, they start to interpret the data. What would the language be that I would use in a kindergarten class? Is this seems messy. Let's kind of organize the data so we can see it. Then the next thing I would say is, what patterns do you notice? Like, what are you noticing? And then the last one is going to be, what story does the data tell? And so that's an example of how we can use the observable feature or observable features of student performance. So this would be what it looks like in lower elementary, and this is what it looks like in in 3 through 5. And this is what it looks like in middle school, and this is what it looks in high school. And so we're moving right from simple data that they represent just kind of by drawing the data to like high, deep analysis using technology. So that's an example of those. And we have those for all of the practices on the website. And I linked it up on that page that I had just thrown in the chat. So if you're saying like, man, I really want my kids to do modeling, what does modeling really look like at that level? And so what we're going to do right now is we're going to go into a breakout. And when we go into the breakout, you'll be thrown in a group with some random folks. I'm not sure, Laura, how big you're going to make the groups. But I think the first thing you should do is you should just figure out, like, judge the room. Introduce yourself to everybody in there. What do you teach? And then I'd love if you would decide on one of these 2 assessments. And so I've got 2 assessments that we can look at. The first one is going to be a K through 2 assessment. And this is going to be like a 2nd grade assessment. So we could say that's representing the end of the vertical. They're looking at a phenomena of melting and then cooling crayons and seeing how they work. And then the other one is upper elementary. So this is looking at, where does the mass of a tree come from? So where's its mass come from? So the first thing I want you to do in the breakouts, and you'll have about 10 minutes to do it, is number one, introduce yourself and just say, like, what are you teaching? If we're all mostly lower elementary, then let's go for the lower elementary one. If you're upper elementary, go for that. But then the next thing I want you to do is I want you to read the assessment. If you had a paper next to you, you could almost jot down, like, if you're a student, how would I answer this? And so the key thing I want you doing as you go through that is just better understanding the assessment itself. I'm going to get out of this window for a second and show you what that would look like on the website. So if you could kind of find me again in Zoom. So again, the website that we're using is this website here. It's the wonderofscience.com/try. If you just got here, I'm going to throw that into the chat again. So once you go there, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to decide what assessment we want to do. And so first of all, introduce yourself to the people in there, but then decide on one of these 2 assessments. We just don't have time this afternoon to do both of them. And so let's say I'm doing reversible and irreversible changes. You can just click on that. And it might be easier if just somebody kind of shares that with everybody, or you could just open it up on your device. When you look at any of the assessments on the Wonder of Science, the first thing will tell you, like, what's the standard, but you'll also have to scroll down a little bit to see the assessment. So this one requires you watching a video. I think there's a video of these crayons that are being melted, and then the crayons eventually are poured into little ice cube trays, and then they cool off. And so this would kind of be the phenomena that the students would start with. So looking at that. And then we're just seeing, like, do they kind of remain as a crayon? So that would be the first one. Or if you want to do for the second one, you could do this one on where trees get their mass. But in the 10 minutes of the breakout, I'll slide around to say hello. Could you decide on which one you want to dig into, but then read the whole assessment so that you're thorough in your understanding of that. And then when we'll come back together, we'll start thinking about how can we assess students in these different dimensions. Can I get a big thumbs up if you know what we're doing? All right, I'm seeing most thumbs up. Oh, and a digital thumbs up. That's awesome. So Laura, if you don't mind launching those, that would be great. And I'll see you in there. Can you hear me, Laura?
I can. I think you should just let them do some stuff before you go bouncing in there.
Sounds good. I think I saw them in the assessments, at least a couple of people.
Yeah, a bunch of people just bounced out. So we have one room with 5, one room with 6, and 2 rooms with 4.
Okay, I think that'll be okay, right?
I think so.
It's the first breakout bounce, right?
Yeah. And I wonder if I can try to figure out if somebody comes and goes. There's only 4 groups, so maybe I can open up these screenshots and put them back in the same room.
Gotcha.
So when they come back, it will be 25 after.
Gotcha.
You know,
And our hard
halfway
stop's at
through.
350. Yeah. So then the next thing is like explaining where these are, or do we talk about the assessments or not?
No,
Gotcha.
I think you just go to what this is about. This is about assessing the practices.
Right. Alrighty, I'll maybe just swing by to say hello.
Hello, Joanna. Are you just joining us?
Hi, yes, I'm joining a little late.
That's totally fine. I'm going to put you into a breakout group. They're looking at an assessment. Let me move
Okay.
you into a room, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Hi, Paul.
Hey, how's it going, Laura?
Good. Everybody's doing something?
Yeah.
Excellent. My connection has been much stabler today. Why do you think that is?
Don't know. Yeah, who knows? I didn't restart anything.
It would not have anything to do with how many other people are on the Zoom, would it ever?
I don't think so, but who knows? It could be. We'll get, I mean, we can do an experiment, I guess. We'll look at that.
Let's see what happens at the next thing. Maybe there'll be more people, right?
Yep. So we've got 2 doing the grade 5 and then 1 doing the grade 2. And somewhere, I think there's some confusion on, is this a summative or how is it used or where do you find, you know what I mean?
Like, this is just an exercise.
What's that?
You should just say that this is an exercise to look at. Well, you can say whatever you want.
No, but an exercise in looking at these different dimensions. Is that what you're saying?
This is an exercise specifically in looking at the practices.
Yep.
It's strange how even teachers still get stressed by the word assessment.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it's not stress, I guess, as much as it's
No, it's stress, I think.
right.
I mean, it's not like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna fail, but it's just like everybody thinks of tests. as
Yeah,
something that's
right.
bad. No one's ever like, hey, I'm gonna go take a test, and you're super excited.
That's true. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, it definitely has a lot of baggage, right?
Yeah, and so I think when I just think that that's a hard, especially if you're asked to do it and you're not comfortable, maybe even with the content,
Right.
or you just aren't prepared. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Absolutely.
One thing I know about this is we don't have a lot of huge expectations for the outcomes of this assessment, right?
Right.
I'm not trying to track anybody's knowledge, just trying to help them learn.
I don't think it helps me to show more of the feature analysis chart.
No. You think that might have been a little much, the chemistry one?
Sorry. I'm sure this is all being recorded, right?
Yeah.
Another prompt could have been like, read it. It should have been like, look at it, read it, and then talk about like what would kids struggle with, and you know what I mean? But you never remember that until you're done. You know what I mean?
Or read it and think about the practice that you're doing.
Right. Yeah. Or you can bring them back whenever, or I know when the time's up.
You mean like in 12 seconds?
Yeah, in 12 seconds. Awesome.
All right, here we go.
Hey, Laura, thanks. Thanks for coming. We're just coming out of a breakout room. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the main room. Hopefully, I had fun talking to some other people and taking some assessments. I tried to get into the rooms to kind of talk about like, why are we doing this and what the role of this is. For me, I think the hardest part about being, it's one of many hard parts about being an elementary teacher, is that you have to be an expert in all these different things. I have to be an expert in literacy and now math and social studies. And so for me, a big project that I've been working on for quite a while is writing assessments for all the standards. And so these are examples of assessments that I wrote. I've got assessments for all the elementary standards from kindergarten through grade 5. And the reason I'm doing that is not so you're testing your kids. These are not like necessarily there so we can start measuring and testing kids. I wrote the assessments mostly for teachers, so that instead of having to like unpack the standard and what does this mean and how do I teach this, like I want you as teachers to be able to take the assessments and have a better understanding of like, how do I teach a unit so I make sure that my kids could kind of be successful on that. Where would these be used in the class? A lot of teachers use them in planning before they do the unit. Let's just take the assessments as a team together. I think that's a really good protocol. So if there are like 4 third grade teachers, let's just sit down and take these assessments. What did we struggle with? And then what are they going to have to be able to get some help with? Also, I think they work really good as formatives. So like we can just use them activities throughout the unit as well. Each of them are going to have kind of a new phenomena. But the big thing that we're doing in this session is we're really trying to figure out, how do we start measuring students' ability to do a practice or think through a cross-cutting concept? And so as we shift to the practices, you'll find that in both the grade 2 assessment and the grade 5 assessment, you were still focusing on the same practice. So what was the practice that you were doing? What were you asked to do, class? Somebody want to chime in with that? What was the practice we were doing?
Argumentation.
Yeah, right, Kelly. So like an argument is made up of 3 things. It's a claim, it's got evidence, and then it's got reasoning. And so all the assessments that we're looking at, we just chose ones that are argumentation for all of them today. So as we dig into looking at assessments, the second grade one, if I just share screen for a second grade one, if I share screen for a second, you're asked to look at changes in the crayons. You're supposed to talk about the changes. And then at the bottom, you're supposed to make a claim with evidence and reasoning. So what you're just saying is this a reversible or is this not a reversible? And so anytime you see claim, evidence, reasoning, that means that we're doing an argument. So we're supporting a claim with evidence and reasoning. If we look at grade 5, it's bigger. So we're getting into more data. So looking through pretty complex data sets. And what we're trying to do, if we look down at the bottom, is claim, evidence, reasoning again. So it's going to be argumentation. One thing I've found when students are doing argumentation is a lot of time they have a trouble like just looking through the evidence first and what is important evidence. So you can see in both these assessments that I included this one here. So just what patterns do you see in the evidence? And same thing with the grade 2, just like what are you noticing? What are some observations that you're noticing before and after? And it's just allowing you to kind of frame your thinking around that. If we were to say like, well played, it's argumentation. What was the cross-cutting concept? Any of my lower elementary people pull that out? Like, what is the cross-cutting concept that we're asked to think in on this assessment? You can always scroll to the, yeah, you can always,
Energy and matter.
yeah, let's take a look. So if we look at the first one, if we look at the melting crayons one, it's going to be cause and effect. So in this case, what we're really looking at is the cause is we're trying to see if heating or cooling has the effect of changing a material so it can't come back again. I think in this assessment, as I look at it, cause and effect could have been a little bit more, as I just looked through it, it could have been a little bit more explicit. I don't know how many of you use cause and effect or would use cause and effect in your reasoning. And then as we look at the second one, the 5th grade one, it's really about, whoever said that, I'm not sure, it was like matter and energy. So we're really trying to get is kids thinking about matter and where does that matter come from? If we think about the answers, so the answers to these, if you were just doing this for the crayons one, you should say this is a reversible change. And the reason why is the evidence should be that they had the same characteristics before and after the change. So after we heat it up and cool it down, it's still a crayon, and that kind of would be more of your reasoning. If we look at the other one for the tree, where do trees get most of their mass? Most of the tree's mass actually comes from the air, and then some of it comes from the water as well. And so that's kind of what we're trying to get at this. What do most kids think? Most kids and most humans think that they get most of their mass from the soil, but it's actually not much is coming from the soil itself if we were to take the mass before. And so looking at the evidence there. So this is just an assessment, and the whole point of that is to take the assessment first, and then after you've taken the assessment, figure out what would our kids struggle on. So in here, do we have any 5th grade teachers with us today? Yeah, so I think I said your name wrong yesterday. Was it Azalea? Is that right? Azalea? How would your 5th grade students do on this?
We were actually talking about this in my group, and I was saying, I think they would struggle with 2 parts. Like, I think they would easily understand like the disciplinary core idea in terms of that they would get, and they would be able to say it. But I think the part that they would really struggle with is the data set, because I think that they are not used to seeing so many at one time. And so I was thinking that a lot of them would just see those 3 data tables. Like they'd get that first, that picture, and
Right.
then they'd get to the 3 data tables and totally freak out. So I was saying it's also a lesson to me that we need to be a lot more explicit so that they're seeing more of those data tables more regularly, because I don't think they see them that regularly across the board. So I think even before they got to the CER, that they would struggle with that part, even though they would know the information.
Right. And so like, as you as a teacher, is this what I'm hearing you say, to be like, we'd have to kind of scaffold them, getting them used to looking at just a simple data set, and now let's add 2 data sets and maybe add a 3rd. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
They'd have to get used to that. Yeah,
Mhm.
No, that seems good. It sounded like you were going to say there was another thing they would struggle with. Were there 2 things you were thinking they would struggle with?
I mean, I think it would be hard. They always tend to be hard. I think we all do that. I mean, even in my group yesterday, I saw the adults struggling with it, is them being able to put it in like terms of the claimed evidence reasoning, right? It's just that they're used to giving a long explanation, or they're used to answering in a certain way. But then, you know, we have to also scaffold it and start to teach them. I think that was that part also about explicitly teaching CER, and it has to happen more than once for them to be able to do it well.
Gotcha. So the practice as well. Yeah, that argumentation of like, I don't know, this resonates for me. Like they can tell you what they're thinking really, really quickly, but pulling it apart into what am I saying is a claim? Is that what you're saying? What of that is evidence? And then what is the reasoning? Yeah. So for that, it's like, yeah. So getting those mini lessons of teaching those 2 things, I think that's the point of looking at assessments like this, is that you have a better sense of what are the mini lessons going to look like to teach them those skills. And so the next step that we're going to do is, given infinite time, we would just have some student work now. That we gave this to our students, maybe we use it formatively, and we could start looking at assessments to figure out like, where are they at and where are we going to go next? And so the next thing that we're going to do, and we'll do this in breakout, is we're going to start looking at student work and figuring out where are they. So let me, if you could just find me in the chat or in Zoom rather for a second. So I'm going to go to that same page again to start with. So where we had, let me go back to this. So it's the tri-association page. And so on here, we have what's called a feature analysis chart. And so since we only have 3 breakout rooms, we only have to use this first one. So I'm just going to click on this first Google Sheet. And so what we've got is a simple feature analysis chart. And so what we've got on the left side are the practices, things like student made a claim, student described the evidence, student evaluated the evidence. And so what we're going to do in this next breakout is that your group number is going to be one of the vertical columns in this Google sheet. And so what you'll do is click on, first we got to figure out, like, let's make sure we're doing the same assessment that you just took. So if I go back to that 5th grade one, on the bottom, you can see there's a 3rd through 5th grade band and then a K2 band. So make sure you're on the right one. So we would go to the 3 to 5 band. And then what you do is just click on group 1. And what it'll do is allow you to open up actual, so this is like answers to that assessment. So there's going to be responses from the student. And so you can see, what did they write here for patterns and what did they write for their claim, evidence, and reasoning. And so what you're going to do as a group then is we're just going to go through and we're just going to use a 1-0 rubric to score this student. And so we're going to say, did this student identify a claim to be supported about the phenomena and include the relative disciplinary core idea, this idea that matter comes from primarily the water and the air. And if we think they did, then as a group, we're just going to change this 0 to a 1. And we're not going to give like half points. We're not going to give like they almost got it. It's either did they get it or did they not get it? We're not grading. Are you with me? We're just trying to see where are kids at and how tightly are we getting to that. And so you can see that what's going to happen is I'm going to start to get kind of scores along the bottom. And so do that if you would for the grade 5th assessment. Again, how do you get to your student? Make sure you click on the top and then open this up. As always, I think this is best if just one person opens it up. You could each kind of have that student work on your computer if you wanted to, but it's a discussion. One little thing before we go is when you're deciding, do we give them a 1 or do we give them a 0? Make sure that you're using evidence to do that. So we have to look at evidence in what they said to give them a 1 or a 0. We don't want to just kind of wing it. And then we're going to see kind of what patterns are going on. So Laura, let's go 10 minutes, I think, if we got it for this one. And we're going to start looking at student work on argumentation.
So Paul, we had twice as many people join us, so the groups are now about 8 people. Because I
Okay,
didn't think we should put them in their own group because they wouldn't know what's going on.
gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Did we always have a 4th group, Laura?
Yep, we always had a 4th group.
Okay, cool.
Did you miss them the first time around? Hi, Adriana. We are in breakout groups. Would you like me to add you to one? I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Hi, I got kicked out of break at room 4.
All right, let's get you back in there.
Thank
Here you
you.
go. How's it going?
Sorry about that, Laura. I was muted.
Really?
Yep. And how much time do we have left?
1 minute, 52 seconds.
Okay.
And then when they come back, you'll have 3 minutes to wrap it up.
Okay. Alrighty.
Do they all look like they're doing the same thing?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think actually we're having some disagreement, it looks like, here on, and I don't know where student group 4 is really. I should go check on them. I've lost my Zoom window. We could close them up now.
All right. Did you close them up early?
No, I don't think so. I got the dialogue. Welcome back, folks. Welcome, welcome. Alrighty, I didn't get to spend a ton of time in each of the groups, but it was fun to watch you kind of walk through and look at the student responses. Dale, it was fun. Your comment of like, I think you said it's hard to give them a 0. Like, you know what I mean? Because you were kind of, help me on that, Dale. It was like they were partially there. Is that what you were kind of getting at?
Yeah, that's what we were debating quite a bit of. If you have some information there, but is it a claim? Or with the second part that we had, you have some information there. Some relates to the claim and some didn't. So, but Paul said, you know, can't give them partial credit.
Yep. And so it is like, I think to frame why we're doing this, I think the key thing is just like using that assessment screening tool helps us get closer to what the actual standard is. Like a lot of assessments I would see for a standard like this wouldn't even have the right practice and wouldn't getting them digging into claim evidence reasoning. What I find is when you look at student work, now we can compare the student work to the standard, and then we get closer to what we really need to do with our kids. And so I try to frame this as we're not grading now. We're just trying to better understand the standard itself. And I would imagine, like, if you're in one of these groups, you have a pretty good understanding of what that standard is now, just by looking at the assessment and now looking at how we'd evaluate it. And what didn't we look at? We never looked at all of the standard. We're just kind of working backwards from what is the assessment. And now you'd be, I think, set up to kind of start planning a unit so the kids could be successful on an assessment like this. And so I think the key thing of doing this, and now I'm going to pimp my website for just a second, is to really get kids deeper into the practices. And so one, I think, nice thing that we have that you could use as a tool now that you've done it is it doesn't matter what standard you're doing. So if I click on any standard, let's say I'm teaching grade 1 and we're looking at life structures and functions, maybe I'm clicking on this standard right here. So this is on parents and offspring. So on the website, there'll always be an assessment that you could look at. So this would be an assessment on feeding cardinals. And so you could look at that assessment to better understand the standard. Another thing you could click on is a feature analysis chart. That was that Google Doc, or rather the Google Sheet that we were just looking at to kind of compare the assessment to student work. But there's also mini lessons and graphic organizers and everything related to that, anchor charts and phenomena. There's a bunch of things on here, but I think the key thing is if you start with the standard and then the assessment, you can kind of never go wrong. I've kind of run out of time. I know we have kind of a hard stop at 3:50. I wanted to say, thanks for digging in. Your breakout groups were highly functional. Elementary teachers are so great. Like, you're really good at listening to each other and digging deeper. So if you had any quick questions, I would answer them. But if not, have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks again. Thanks so much. Oh, that's cool. Natalie you had done an assessment with your 4th grade. Tell me about that.
Well, I'm in the Earth Systems unit, and we talked about earthquakes and volcanoes. So today in class, I show them a map that shows like all the earthquakes, and the evidence was like, what do you see there? It's like, we see lots of earthquakes happening along these lines, and then we develop a claim together. Like, we did the activity together because they've never done something like this
Cool.
before.
How did it go?
They were so excited because maps show like also the intensity of the earthquakes in blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. And then the claim was that most earthquakes happen along boundaries, plate boundaries or fault lines. And then we needed to connect the evidence in the claim in the reasoning, and they loved it.
That's
and
cool.
Then the independent part, I showed the same map, but instead of earthquake, it was volcanoes.
That's awesome.
It was pretty easy to make the connection that they happen along plate boundaries and stuff. And the next unit is erosion, so I'm already getting the test, and I got the vocabulary, and I got the learning plan, and I got everything on your side. And
That's
I'm working
awesome.
like PowerPoint presentation to help me like drive everything along the unit.
That's awesome. Very cool. Thanks for trying stuff and thanks for coming. That's really
If I don't
exciting.
try it right away, then I'll forget.
That's awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Natalie. Have a
Okay.
great one. Yeah, cheers.
You too. Bye.
Bye.